Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Blake here with ChessPathways.com, and this is the third video in my series Taking on the Titans, where I show the games I've played against international masters and grandmasters throughout the course of my career. This was a game I played back in July of 2016 against international master Dionesio Aldama, and I'm lucky enough to still have my original annotations from right after this game was played. This was at the Philadelphia International, a big international tournament usually held right before or right after the World Open. So let's get to the game. I have the white pieces, and the game starts out with a Sicilian defense. Aldama opts for the Khan variation, much like Sergei Kudrin did in the game I showed against him. I played the bishop d3 line again, knight f6, castles, d6, and I opt for c4 immediately, and we get this hedgehog-type structure. We both finished developing our pieces. I play an early f4, bishop e3, knight c6. I'm getting my rooks into the game. Sometimes the rooks will go to c1 and d1 in this structure. Sometimes they'll go to d1 and e1. I think there are quite a few ways both players can handle this structure. The big thing is black is eventually going to want to break with either d5 or b5, or in some cases f5. Those are really black's only three pawn breaks in this position. Possibly e5 at the right moment, but I don't think it's as common. And if black can't achieve one of these pawn breaks, then white is just comfortable here with a space advantage. But white also needs to be careful not to overextend, because black could certainly punish that at a later point in the game. Queen c7, I just play king h1, getting off of this diagonal. Rook fe8, and I bring the knight back to f3. So I had some ideas here to retreat this bishop, possibly play a rook to e1 if needed, and play e5, and try to open this bishop towards the king, and start attacking before black has a chance to really fight back, and while black is still cramped. I had played a nice game in this line just a week prior and done pretty well with this kind of plan, so I thought I would go for it again. Rook a to d8, and here I played bishop g1, and when I analyzed this after the game, my computer was recommending to be a little more flexible, and I kind of liked the computer's idea here. Instead of retreating right away, the computer wanted to play a3, which makes some sense. White's just trying to possibly take more space and play b4, and black still doesn't have the information of which way I'm going to retreat this bishop, if at all. For example, after knight d7, intending a similar plan as the game where black can bring the bishop to f6 and start to kind of activate their pieces, I can just play b4 and on bishop f6, knight a4, with the possible plan to pile up on this b pawn. I guess queen f2 would be a threat in this position. At any rate, I played bishop g1, black played g6. This is possibly intended to swing the bishop around to help defend the king and be very active on the long diagonal. And now knight a4. I think this is just a bad move. Somehow I thought I was going to be able to add a lot of pressure to the b6 pawn, but with the queen not being able to get behind the bishop, it doesn't really work as well. Simply after knight d7, this pawn is just well defended. And I didn't see a really clear plan to add pressure to it, and if I can't do that, this knight's really doing nothing on a4. For example, queen f2 would be a logical follow-up, just adding a third attacker to the b6 pawn, but what I realized here is that after knight c5, it doesn't seem like I've accomplished anything. And in fact, black would succeed in exchanging a set of pieces one way or the other, which is kind of a small victory for them, because when you're cramped, when your opponent has a space advantage, oftentimes you'll want to exchange some pieces, so your pieces aren't tripping all over each other. So in the game, after knight d7, I decided just to play right back to c3, kind of admit that knight a4 wasn't the right idea. Bishop f6, and now I switch back to putting my rook on the c file, possibly intending knight d5 at some point. Sorry, not the pawn. Knight d5, with the idea that if they accept that knight sacrifice, I'll be able to take back and exploit this pin. That said, I have been kind of wishy-washy so far, playing knight a4 and coming right back, putting the rook on d1 and then going back to c1, so I haven't really been able to make up my mind how I want to proceed in this position. Nonetheless, I still thought this was somewhat pleasant for white with my space advantage. Bishop g7, and now I played knight to g5, intending to play on the king side and possibly play f5 at some point, and to try to break through. My original intention here, to play knight d5, I looked at it, but I didn't think it was so great. For example, so here, black wins a piece for a pawn, but I'm going to get a piece for a pawn back, so material is probably going to end up equal, but just some of these resulting positions did not seem very favorable for me. For example, now the bishop's wide open. Black is left with an isolated pawn after the mess clears, but their pieces are just so active, and I didn't think this was the right way to proceed. And indeed, this is pretty pleasant for black. So instead, knight g5, knight c5, bishop b1, avoiding exchanges, but now before I'm able to break through while black is still cramped, Aldama was able to get this key pawn break in and play d5, ready to unleash all their pieces. So I played e5 here, which looked like the best try for me. I don't think I want to exchange there, because then this rook's just going to get opened up on my queen. So I thought playing e5 was a good attempt here to gain a space advantage again, seal off this bishop, seal off this rook. And I thought white was still doing okay here. Black kicks my knight away and then plays d4, gaining this strong passed pawn here in the center. So I kind of lost the battle of the opening. I wasn't able to organize anything concrete, kind of shifted between plans a little bit, didn't really stick to an idea, and black was able to get their key pawn break in that black usually wants to get in this structure. Now I played knight d1, which is a mistake. After d3, this is definitely starting to look good for black. I missed a chance here. Instead, I missed this very nice move, b4. So if black exchanges on c3, I just take on c5, and that's not a problem. This pawn's probably just going to fall now, it's really weak. And if knight takes b4, I deflected this knight away from the pawn, and now I can take that strong passed pawn. And while this is still kind of pleasant for black, white's still okay here. So b4, right here, would have been a really nice move to find. Again, just because you're attacked, your first instinct shouldn't be to just say, oh, well, I have to move that piece. Always consider all the checks, captures, and threats, all the forcing moves you can make, and calculate them out. This was just a candidate's move problem. If I would have found b4, I think I could have calculated out that this was good for me. I just simply didn't look for the move b4. So instead, knight d1, d3, and now this is not so great for me. I played queen e3, he played knight e7, possibly heading to f5 and opening up the bishop. I brought my knight back into the game. Knight f5, queen d2. So he played a5, which looks weakening at first. He's giving up the b5 square, but he knew that what I would love to do here is play b4, kick the knight away, and win this pawn. It might be tricky because of some of these pins on the file, but it is a very real threat if black's not careful. So a5 preventing b4 was the point of this move. But I still couldn't quite see how this pin was going to be exploited, and I decided it was worth giving up the bishop for the knight here, so I went ahead and went for it. It was now or never. I didn't want this pawn to become a permanent thorn in my side, so I exchanged off on c5 and took this pawn. Now it turns out black could have exploited a lot of his dynamic advantages here. Queen e3 was a very strong move. And I can't really take that queen because after the knight takes, I just have an exchange threatened and a piece threatened, and white is going to lose material. So instead, after queen e3, I would have to play something like rook c to d1, and now g5 would be incredibly strong. A very common pawn break when white has this pawn structure just blowing open the position for the bishop, while I'm completely tied up. The bishop can't move because of the pin, the rook can't move, and this could get very dangerous for me. For example, if I take on g5, he will simply take back, threatening to play g4, and I can't really take here, because now the tactics start to appear. There's rook takes d3, and if I take that rook, black is taking the knight on g5, with a very strong position here. So that would not be good. So that would have been kind of the culmination of black's play here. But instead, he did not find queen e3. He played knight e3 instead, forking the rook and pawn here. But I realized something here. I realized the knight was going to be trapped if it took on c4, and I started to think, maybe I'll just emerge from this with an extra pawn after all. Maybe I'll be able to wriggle out of this, avoid all the black tactics, and I have an extra pawn here. That certainly counts for something. So rook f to e1, and now he makes a mistake and takes on c4, missing that after queen e2, the knight's kind of trapped there. So he plays b5 to defend it, but now after b3, the knight has to retreat, and I'm taking that b5 pawn, possibly heading into d6. And at this point in the game, I started getting a little flustered and nervous. I was like, whoa, I'm up a pawn, probably with a clearly winning position, against an international master rated 2500 plus. I had never had such a clearly better position against a player of this caliber. Queen b4, I head into d6, and he has really nothing better here than to sack the exchange. Okay, so I'm up a full exchange here. There's some compensation for it. Black does have two bishops, and they're both pretty open. But I'm up a full exchange. And now I start playing terrible. I start playing like a beginner. There's no reason not to just play straightforward here. Play rook c7, put your rook on the 7th rank. And after, for example, bishop d5, knight e5 would be very strong. Targeting f7, black's probably going to have to exchange off his bishop here. I get to maintain my very strong d6 passed pawn. White's winning. I'm not sure why I didn't play it, but if you look at the move I played in the game, I mean, this is what beginners do. You're up material and you're like, let me just exchange everything. I'll make some small concessions, let's just exchange stuff. And apparently that's how I was thinking. I must have been too flustered to think straight for some reason, because this is not good, this part of the game. So we exchange, black gets a pawn back. I basically keep begging black to exchange with me here. Please exchange with me. Black keeps saying no. Knight d5, black gets that nice outpost for the knight. Queen c6, please exchange with me. Queen c8, finally black exchanges with me, but only at the cost of giving them that nice open file. Now, of course, this is still good for white. I'm up an exchange for a pawn, and after knight c4, this a pawn's potentially weak, the rook is cut off from infiltrating, so I still thought this was nice for me. Now, I missed that black just plays a4, but I could still play knight e3 here with a pretty nice position. If black exchanges there, I can just take back. If they take on b3, I can take back. I'm still up an exchange for a pawn. With this many open files, white's doing very well there. Instead, I played rook c1 and just missed how annoying this line would be. After a takes b3, a takes b3, rook b8. And it's not so easy for white to defend this b3 pawn. For example, I wanted to play rook b1, but I remember knight c3 really scared me, because if I come to b2, there could be discoveries, and if I don't come to b2, then black just takes this pawn. Maybe I could have just played rook b2 here, though. Although I think what I saw is that after knight d5, just revealing the bishop on the rook, and the rook on the pawn is still there, I think my only move is to come back, and I thought that black might have a draw by repetition here. After rook b8, so I didn't like rook b1 for that reason. Knight d2 is another move I considered, but now bishop c3 really scared me. For example, in this line, rook c2, I think black would just go ahead and make that exchange, and now material is equal by point count. Black has 2 pawns for the exchange. So I thought, wow, how did I mess this up so bad? I started getting really upset after rook b8. And this just shows you, even in those positions where it looks like you're winning, even when you really are winning, I was up a clean exchange, if you're not accurate, if you just think the game's going to win itself, if you think you can make those small concessions, give up that d6 pawn without really any resistance or anything to show for it, and just play sloppy, very good players are going to make you pay. You can't expect the game to win itself. I think that was probably my biggest mistake here. I started playing scared, trying to exchange everything, instead of trying to make the most of my position like you always should. But now knight e5. Now it's sad that I kind of threw away the win in this game, but there's no way that white should lose this game. But unfortunately, going to this particular endgame, black actually has some decent winning chances here. I probably should have admitted things had gone wrong and maybe taken that line with the repetition. Because here, white really has no active play in this endgame. It's really hard for white to coordinate. And you'll see what happens the rest of the game. Now, I tried analyzing this afterwards. It was really hard to see where white went wrong after this. The computer was able to offer a suggestion, of course. It thinks white should be able to hold this with best play, but it's by no means easy. And I even showed it to my coach after the game, and he kind of agreed. He said, yeah, don't worry about learning this particular theoretical endgame. I mean, it's so rare, it's probably not going to come up again for another 1,000 or 2,000 games. Worry about what happened there between you winning the exchange and you reaching this position. How you got from a position that was probably winning to a position where black has all the winning chances and you're begging for a draw. So I'll just play this out for you with, I guess, minimal comments. There were a lot of moves played, lots of shuffling around. Black's improving his king here. Black starts expanding his pawns, and I'm really doing nothing but sitting around. Try to bring my rook to attack that e6 pawn, but black has everything under control. That knight's in a very strong outpost there. Black starts advancing that king. I knew this should probably still be a draw, but I was getting kind of scared. I really have no active plans here. The only possible weakness here on g6 is completely under control, and meanwhile black is expanding those pawns, bringing the knight to g4 and now h4, trying to create connected passed pawns there in the center. Black exchanges off on g3 and plays rook b3. Now this pawn is a possible weakness. I come back to a8, now knight e3. I come back to g8, knight d6, possibly heading for e4, attacking this pawn. Black just coordinated really well. They created a weakness here on g3, and now it looks like they're about to win it. The king could even help out at some point if this rook abandons the attack on the g6 pawn. And black's winning here. Like I said, in this endgame, without using computers, it's really hard to see the exact point where white went wrong. So rook a6, knight e4 check, and knight takes g3. So I get the g6 pawn, but now the problem is the king is so active. And my king is not. Rook a5, e4. The pawns are coming. f4, e3. I have to come back to guard against back rank mates, and now black starts possibly threatening to swing the rook around to the other side. So I'm trying to defend as best as I can. The knight is always doing a good job keeping my rooks from coordinating. There they stop me from piling up on possibly the e3 pawn. Knight f2, and I resign in this position because of king e1, rook c1 would be checkmate. So I consider this to be one of the most frustrating losses of my chess career. To have a completely winning position against a player of Dionesio Aldama's caliber, and to blow it that badly, not only to not win, but to go on to lose, that was very upsetting, especially considering how hard I had been training at the time, and then to finally get that chance to take down an IM and to blow it that badly. What's the big lesson there? Number one, you don't want to play differently against very strong players than you would against anyone else. Maybe against another player, I don't know, I'm speculating, but maybe I would have found the simple win there with rook c7 and knight e5 and how strong that was. But for some reason, I reverted into let me just offer every exchange I can mode, like I did when I was a worse player, not really caring about those small concessions I was giving up, and he clawed his way back into this game. When you're up material, you can't just offer any exchange that comes to mind and hope you win the endgame. That works when you're a beginner, when you're an intermediate player. In fact, you win probably every time as a beginner by just winning material and then getting to an endgame. But at this level, you can't do that. It doesn't absolve you of the need to calculate just because you're up material. You still have to calculate accurately. So I think those are the two main lessons from this game, and they're probably related. The fear of the opponent, and that probably translating to really a form of laziness or timidness that was expressed by just not really calculating accurately, hoping the game is just going to win itself and trying to offer exchanges. Alright, thanks for watching everyone, and I'm curious, what's your worst chess memory? This is one of mine. Are there any losses you have that you still remember years later? Go ahead and post them in the comments or let me know by email. It's blake@chesspathways.com. And again, if you haven't signed up at chesspathways.com yet, please go over there and do that right now. It only takes a few seconds and you'll get access to our exclusive content and contests. I've been working on making game analysis videos for some of our members, so don't miss out. It's free. Go over to chesspathways.com and sign up. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you again soon.